Back in 2015, when I was in my second semester of college as a freshman, I had a habit of pacing around to keep my thoughts coming. I had had this habit since childhood, and it often seemed that I couldn't stay focused on anything that required creative thought without it. Considering my intended major required literature and creative writing courses, it was something I found myself doing constantly, especially when I was trying to think up ideas for essays and narratives assigned in class. To be clear, my pacing isn't just walking. It needs to be done along a predictable, short route, so I can mentally clock out of reality and focus solely on my thoughts while I run on autopilot. I often put in headphones to prevent distractions that take me back into reality, because if that happens in mid-thought pattern, I would lose at least half of the ideas that I was exploring. It's weird, I know, but I wanted to clarify this now because I've had people ask me why I don't just go for a long walk around the neighborhood, instead of walking around in circles in the backyard like I normally do. It was getting late one evening and I had a lengthy essay due the day after next. I had a good portion of it done already, but I still had a bit to go. My roommate had come back to the dorm, and considering the time it was, perfectly understandable that she wanted to sleep. She generally didn't mind my pacing, but preferred that I didn't do it when she was trying to rest. Also understandable. And with her turning the lights off in the room, it would be a little difficult for me anyway. I still wanted to keep going on this assignment though, so I decided to find somewhere else on campus outside the room to pace, and figured I would note down ideas in an app on my phone, as I needed for later. There was nowhere in the dorm complex that was suitable, so I started walking around. The university was well known for its large campus, so I figured I would find a good place eventually. I walked for a bit until I found myself at one of the more historic buildings, which has a nice courtyard in front of it. Part of this courtyard included wide pedestrian pathways that met in the center, as a nice roundabout with a fountain in the middle. A little further from that was another small roundabout, with a grass island in the center. Circular pathways like that are ideal for my pacing, because I don't have to stop and turn around repeatedly. And I ended up choosing to walk around the one with the grass island, so I wouldn't disturb anyone who wanted to hang out by the fountain. Some people are a bit unnerved by my pacing, so I worried it might freak out a stranger who saw me on a late night walk. There was the occasional passerby, but for the most part, the place was empty at this time of night. I figured I could go in circles for a bit without disturbing anyone. I put in my headphones. Yes, both of them. And yes, I'm aware that was a poor decision, given the circumstances. But I was exhausted and just wanted to get the brainstorming session over with, so I could go to bed. I started to walk in circles with my music playing as my mind drifted. I don't know how long I was pacing before the encounter, but it wasn't long. As I was rounding once more, I was met by headlights from a car driving slowly up the path to this roundabout. I was a little confused by this, as I was sure this path was meant for pedestrian traffic only. But since it was deserted, save for me, I just assumed that the driver needed an easy way to turn around, and didn't think it was a big deal since the risk of accidentally hitting someone was next to zero. The vehicle passed me while I moved closer to the center to keep from being in the way, and I kept my eyes on it while I walked. I expected the car to just go around and back down the path that it came from, since that was the only path in the roundabout that led back to the street. But instead, it came to a stop on the side of the roundabout opposite the street. While I initially started to assume that they needed to look at the GPS or make a phone call before continuing, there was no denying the uneasy feeling I got about the situation. Instead of continuing my round route, which would have taken me right alongside the vehicle, I decided to take one of the paths towards the building and just wait for them to move on. While I walked, I noticed an empty parking lot on the other side of the building. The path didn't go there, but it was easy to walk over the grass patch divided into two areas. I started to pace in the lot for a bit, and I quickly forgot about returning to the roundabout, as I got lost in my thoughts again. I was pulled back into reality by the shine of semi-distant headlights. It was the same car from before, or at least it looked eerily similar. Luckily, I was facing the entrance to the lot as it turned in, and said entrance was a decent distance from me. I started to hear quiet alarm bells on the back of my mind, even as my rational side tried to assume that it must be a different car, and just an odd coincidence, and perhaps I was just paranoid. Regardless of the mental attempt to explain it away, I felt it was better safe than sorry. I ended up walking around the other side of the building to get back to the little roundabout that I was at before. I took a breath and calmed my nerves a little, with some half-hearted reassurances before walking on the roundabouts again. This time, I didn't turn my music back on, but I kept my headphones in. They weren't noise-canceling at all, so I could hear decently through them when the music was paused. I wanted to go back to brainstorming, but felt somewhat anxious and panicky at the thought of it. So, I kept pacing like I had been, this time focused on the very much aware of what was going on around me. I thought that maybe once 10 or 15 minutes had gone by without incident, I would be able to calm down and get the last of this done. Barely 5 minutes had passed when I heard the obvious sound of rubber tires coming up the path again. This time when I looked, I was certain it was the same car that it had followed me back here from the parking lot. I didn't know what the driver wanted with me. They never honked, rolled down their windows, or anything to try and get my attention. But I realized at that point that a 19-year-old girl alone at night in a more secluded area of campus, I had been extremely lucky so far, and that luck wouldn't last forever. This time, I speed-walked through the grass. There's a pedestrian-only arch-like bridge that goes over a busy major street that runs through campus. Most of the dorms like mine are on one side of the bridge, while lecture halls and class buildings are on the other. And while I normally hated this bridge because of how steep it is, it was closer than the nearest street crossing right then, and I didn't have a wait time to cross it, and there was no chance of a vehicle following me up. I felt much more at ease from the top of it, and from there I saw the car drive off, seemingly calling it a night. I walked back to my dorm, and by the time I had reached my door, the adrenaline had worn off and I was exhausted. I went in quietly to not wake my roommate. I laid in bed without even changing into pajamas and I fell asleep. I never contacted campus police about the matter or anything, because I didn't have any helpful information other than a four-door car that could have been black or dark blue for all I know, and it didn't seem like I'd be believed anyway. I never saw the vehicle again or heard anything that related to it in any way, so over time, it slipped from my mind altogether. I still don't know what the driver had planned or why they didn't just get out of the car and come after me on foot at any point. Maybe it was the first time they were trying this and they were nervous about making a scene or getting caught. Maybe it was just some college-aged assholes messing with me, because they thought it was fun to scare people like that. Whatever it was, I'm glad I didn't have to find out the hard way, and I never paced in public areas after dark on that campus again. Back in 2017, I, a 19-year-old female at the time, lived in one of the many rare units behind a strip of main ones on a quiet street. As a young, extremely dumb 19-year-old in a seemingly safe area of Australia, I didn't really think twice about leaving the house late at night. There are 3 incidents that occurred during my stay on that block that left me nervous, and the last one made me think twice about ever leaving my house at night again. I was late to finish class one night, getting off my bus and walking the street down towards my house at around 10 p.m. I was tired and unaware of my surroundings as I pulled into the block, passing what looked like the shadow of a person crouching on the sidewalk with their back towards me. I could hear this muffled noise, and could have decided not to be an ass and check on this person, but I became kind of nervous and scurried off towards my unit. Later on, as I became settled in ready for bed, I heard a loud scuffling around on the concrete outside, and really muffled noise again. I opened my window for the second floor and did this time call out to ask if the person was alright. I heard nothing, and I texted my landlord about the incident. Nothing else really came of that until weeks later when I left my house at night again to walk to the 24-hour servo. As I returned back towards my house, I saw someone again, this time standing still near some bush in the street, alone and not really doing much but staring. The stare. I could feel myself being closely examined. Getting a bit nervous now, as this is the second time I've seen someone standing on the street, but I still brushed past and for some reason I waved. It was then that I took it up with the landlord again, finding out that a few other tenants had also complained about a stranger hanging around at night. The police were notified, and there was nada. It was months later, and everything had sunk into the back of my mind. My then partner and I were in a tiff with each other, and he was leaving my place to go home. I was annoyed, but didn't feel right letting him walk home by himself, so I walked with him. On the way back, I noticed that dreaded silhouette again, in the middle of the road under the street lamp this time. I mentally went through every single what, where, who, how, why then and there. Months later, there's a person just standing in the dark. When I tell you that, I literally felt my heart sink. I neared closer to find out that, this definitely had to be the same person as before, because he was just standing there, watching the houses on the street. So, here I am now, crouched behind a tree and waiting out for what feels like an eternity, while he's fixed there, standing in the middle of a dead road, peeping into the houses out the front. Like nothing in the world could break the bizarre fixation on the unit. I remember trying to justify it in my head, trying to play it off like it wasn't as weird as it was, and soon decided that maybe I am just being paranoid about all of this. I remember getting antsy, thinking, forget this, I'm going home. And so with that, I got up to pass him, trying to make it as smooth as possible, just in case I had actually been wrong about the entire situation. It was within seconds of passing him that I met eyes with him too. Something had forced me to bolt. Maybe the fact that I remember him grinning at me from within 2 arms a distance of me. Maybe the fact that he shrieked when he saw me too. But I ran so fast, shocking even myself about how fast I ran. Lo and behold, I could hear gravel crunching behind me. Well, I got in, slammed my door, and in a frenzy, I called the police, practically yelling at the top of my lungs in hopes that if he was following me, he would hear it. The landlord, family, everyone that I knew, I was frantically calling that night. I got my neighbor to sleep over too. I learned later on in the week that CCTV had picked up the person, and he had indeed run after me all the way up to my door, jumped into the closest bush to my house, and waited around for me for 10 minutes and did even watch my landlord inspect around from the inside of the bush. 10 minutes later, the person gets out and casually walks away, taking me back exit through the path on the side. Despite being too paranoid to leave it all for a while, I didn't hear anything again. Police did eventually arrive that night, around the unit that was questioned, but we heard nothing of it. I still have no idea who this person was. I have no idea why he would pop up in the complex at random times, just to stand around for hours. No idea why he chased me, and no clue why he was never seen again after the fact. Even now, I am still uncomfortable with the idea of leaving at night, even in a new area. So please, no more weird night strangers. It was the beginning of fall, and my dad had a little over a month off work because he had just had a hernia surgery. I'm 19, but I am currently unemployed and not in school, though I'm doing my best to work on remedying that, but it's besides the point. The point is, I was free to come along, and I accompanied him to a little over a week at the beach in North Carolina. We had been staying at the beach for a few days, and I had been spending most of my time in the indoor pool. Now, the place we stay at is directly on shore, so all I had to do was step outside and walk down a ramp, and there was the ocean. The thing is, this beach wasn't far down from the local pier, so it's basically near public access. This made it crowded, especially since there were some huge waves going on at the time that we were there, so there was a decent surf crowd. Now, I don't mind big crowds when I'm with friends or family, but my dad was fishing most of the time, and I'm not a big fan of shore fishing when tons of people are around. Kids play in the water, people walk into your line or chase fish away. It's not fun. Plus, the seagulls can be a pain. So basically, I didn't want to go on the beach during the day. But at night, I was game. I loved walking the beach just after the sunset. There were barely any people. Not feeling self-conscious or anxious or worrying dealing with my anxiety much at all. Just me, the beach, and the occasional ghost crab that I would catch, take a picture of, and let go. This particular night, I was sad. I was worried about my friend and his well-being because of some personal things going on in his life, and I was scared that he was going to get hurt, especially when almost the entirety of our friend group was praising him for it, and telling me that I worry too much. Which perhaps I do, but I really care about his well-being, and I wasn't too pleased with having my fear shrugged off. So, to get my mind off of things, I walked further than I usually do. I decided to walk all the way down to the pier by myself, ignoring common sense because at that point, I had bigger issues to worry about. At least, to me I did. It was barely light enough out to see without a flashlight, and yes, you were by the pier and the area surrounding it, which was weird because usually the moonlight was brighter. The night just felt stranger than usual, and I was slightly on edge. It was hard to see people and the beach was almost completely empty. Most of the time, there are at least a dozen people walking up and down the shore at this time, since it was only about 10 or 11 p.m. But not that night. It was vacant from what I could see. But still, I kept walking. I'm not the tiniest of girls. I'm about 5'9" and weigh 170, so I honestly wasn't that worried. I'm a decent runner and I knew that if there was any danger, I could scream to the workers who were no doubt closing the pier up for the night, since I'm pretty sure they close at about 10. And even if not that, plenty of beach houses line that shore, and you can hear noises pretty easily. And if all else failed, like I said, I'm a decent runner. That became less and less comforting though, because as I walked, I looked to my right and noticed two hooded figures just sitting in the sand up by the dunes. They were almost invisible in the spot that they were in, and I only noticed them because of their cigarettes. They wore black hoodies and long pants, and even what looked like shoes. I didn't flat out make it obvious that I was staring at them. I had a hoodie on as well, and I just peeked at them from the corner of my eye to the best of my ability. I found it out that people were wearing what seemed to be tennis shoes or boots on the beach, knowing that sand would get in there. I shrugged it off and kept going, my mind going back to my friend in no time. I was far closer to the pier when I stopped, not that far from it. It was pretty, so I decided to walk up the sand a bit, to a higher vantage point to take in the view, when I noticed another figure under the pier. The pillars of the pier are tall and no one was around. The figure was facing my direction and just standing. He was dressed like the other guys, hoodie, and seeming to wear shoes. Now, this was an even stranger spot to be wearing shoes in, since it was on the wet sand, edging the line that the tide was reaching and retreating from. It seemed like we just watched each other for a long moment, before he suddenly started sprinting towards me. Now, I was close to the pier, but still, a good distance away from being underneath it. And still, he was fast, and had cleared a few yards in only seconds. I had frozen and was terrified, and I had just tensed up. I was about to turn, about to start running from this crazy dude, when out of nowhere he spun around on his heel, mid-sprint, and ran back onto the pier. He disappeared under the darkness, and I didn't see him. I didn't know if he was on drugs or some college or high school kid, thinking it would be funny to scare the living crap out of a girl, but I wasn't sticking around to find out. I turned around and began quickly walking back towards where I was staying, looking over my shoulder every 2 seconds. I swear that I heard laughter, but it may have just been in my head. I was back on the beach and just reaching the halfway point back to my place when I saw those two same guys from before, still in their spot, having not moved an inch. About 15 to 30 minutes had probably passed, and I don't know if their posture had even changed. I had calmed down and was processing what had happened at the pier by this point, but seeing those two again didn't help my remaining unease. I just reminded myself that lots of people like the beach at night, and there was nothing to worry about, and I kept walking. What really set me on edge again is when I had walked several yards past them back on the beach. I got an anxious feeling and I looked back, and realized that they were trailing behind me about a yard back. And the weirder thing, when they realized that I had stopped in my tracks and was watching them, they turned on their heels and walked the other way. It was mid-stride too, just like the runner. I have no explanation for this crazy story. If the running guy knew the other two, if it was just a random coincidence that I ran into three figures fully dressed for freaking winter on the beach with shoes on. Maybe they were all high off their butts. I don't know. All I know is that the only thing I got out of that experience is a somewhat interesting, if confusing story, and added caution when alone.